Greetings, bibliophiles, and welcome back to The Book Thing, where today I am covering Cog by Ceres Wright. Now, this is one of those books I picked up, as with a couple of the most recent book videos, well, I say recent, comparatively recent, where I just bought them blind and was trying to expand my horizons a little bit. And in the case of this novel, I actually know somebody who knows the author, and so I'd previously long ago heard of the novel because it was first published in 2013, and so I actually bought it on that basis. So as much as I can say I have some kind of connection with the author, you know, that's it. We're delving into Spaceballs territory here about how I knew that somebody's cousin's brother's college roommate, or whatever that line exactly was. But yeah, still, it's one of the few times when I've been able to even have that much of a connection with a published novel. But yeah, it's a bit tenuous, isn't it? So it's a cyberpunk thriller, basically, and it doesn't go too heavily on the cyberpunk elements. We're not talking full-on Blade Runner or anything along those lines, or William Gibson. But it's there, and it does make for a reasonably interesting backdrop to the main elements of the story, the thriller part. But overall, I can honestly say I finished this one more out of a sense of duty than through actual enjoyment, because it does have some fairly deep flaws, and of the things I did enjoy, I'd have enjoyed them more if they were a bit more developed. Now, the plot itself concerns Nicole Ryder, who is the scion of a wealthy family. Her family owns a company called American Hologram, who have, you know, grown up to be this big semi-monopolistic corporation, but it's still a family-owned affair. So basically her father runs it and her brother is a vice president, and we learned that she was at one point also working for the company for a very brief period of time, but didn't find herself that well suited, so she ended up going off the rails for a bit, and she's eventually, like, you know, I think it's her brother Will's, because her father's he's a bit of a distant figure for most of it, but then he's also comatose for most of it, and I'm getting ahead of myself here anyway. But yeah, she's brought back into the fold and gets dried out, and ends up basically putting on art shows. So she's not, I mean, she's still, you know, she's back in with the family, because they essentially gave her this ultimatum that you've got to, you know, straighten up your act if you want us to keep, you know, giving you money to fund your lifestyle. And so she ends up with a more of a respectable job, but she's still not really connected with the company. But all that changes when her father is mysteriously put into a coma, as I mentioned, and her brother Wills disappears with 50 billion of the company funds. And this is all looking very dicey, because at the same time, a long-lost bastard son of Garen Ryder, the father and head of the company, has turned up and been given like a vice presidency. So he's kind of turned up, and it's all very suspicious timing. And then somebody tries to kill Nicole just as she's kind of been brought back in as, you know, the one member of the family that isn't comatose or has run away with a lot of money. So that's kind of like the setup for the plot. And then we've got this countdown, essentially, where her father's will, and again, mysteriously, nobody knows quite why it says this, but her father's will says if he's in a coma for too long, if, you know, if he's knocked out in such a state, then his life support is to be switched off after, I think it's like 5 days, something like that. So she's really got quite a tight time limit to try and figure out what's going on, to try and figure out what's wrong with her father, to try and figure out who's trying to kill her, and you know, do something about it all. And she actually ends up getting some help from another person at the company, and there's kind of a semi-romantic interest going on there, but it's not, like, it doesn't, that's not really a main thing of the novel. It's actually quite low-key and subtle, and it's nice in that way, because, you know, it doesn't have to be. They're in the middle of this drama, and she's thinking about her father's life support potentially getting cut off. So there's a little bit of development of that there, but it's not like, you know, it's not a major theme of the novel, is what I'm going for. So where the problems come in for me is in a couple of areas. For one thing, I found the characters generally to be interesting, and I found Nicole as a black female protagonist to be interesting, but it kind of falls down because there's not a lot of development going on. I think the author, she just has such a focus on the action and this idea that time is ticking down, we must move things along, we must get to the next plot point. It really doesn't leave that much along the way for deep character development, so I felt that could have been better, and that was one of the areas I already enjoyed, and I would have enjoyed it a lot more if we knew more about who these people were, how they ticked, and instead everything is very much in the moment for the most part. We get a bit of an exploration or an explanation, either works, of Nicole's past, where she went off the rails a bit and got involved in, well, drugs kind of, but kind of not. This is one of the cyberpunk elements of the story, and so we get a bit more of her as a character, but not. It's still not as much as I would have liked. It was hard to get a sense of who most of these people were and what their motivations were. Although part of her motivation, I mean, she ends up having to go basically back to one of her contacts from her less salubrious days, and part of her motivation is actually she doesn't want to, but she ends up being forced to because she doesn't know who else to turn to. But one of the other problems, and that kind of leads me into saying this, one of the other problems is the whole process whereby that comes about doesn't really make sense. There are some quite significant plot holes at times, or maybe not plot holes, maybe non sequiturs would be a better term. Things that don't especially make sense, things that aren't logical from the point of view of a reader, and we don't get a sense from the novel, because you know, sometimes it's fine to have characters not do logical things. It's all about how you present that to the reader, and it isn't really addressed. It's just, oh, this has happened and then this has happened, and I was just sat there, you know, a couple of times through the story thinking, wait, but why did that makes no sense. One thing does not necessarily follow from the other. So that isn't so much a bad point in terms of character development or character choices as it is the narrative not really being up to scratch in terms of giving us some notion of why people are doing these seemingly illogical things. Because I mean, a really good example of that is Thomas Hardy. I've only read a couple of Thomas Hardy novels, and I've actually kind of I've read 2 all the way through, and I think I gave up on a third. Or was it only 1 all the way through? I can't remember. But that's kind of a central tenet of Thomas Hardy, is people going around making completely irrational decisions that end up only hurting them in the end. And it's usually presented in a way where the narrative voice of the story is like, well, that's completely a stupid thing to do, so they went ahead and did it anyway. You know, not quite like that. He didn't quite present it like that, but it was one of the things that kind of kept me going through Tess of the D'Urbervilles. When you've got all these characters running around being really stupid, you just get this sense of the narrator, well, not the narrator exactly, there isn't like the narrative voice rather, let's put it that way, you know, just slapping a hand to their forehead and going, for goodness sake, did they really just do that? Yes, they did. Well, I'm as exasperated as you are, dear reader. There really wasn't any of that in Cog. So the things that don't make sense just simply don't make sense. I mean, the biggest example for me is and this is a very minor plot spoiler, but at the point where somebody tries to assassinate Nicole, and this is all quite early in you know, this is all part of the setup of what happens next and her going on the run and everything. But yeah, the person that tries to assassinate Nicole, this person also kills 2 other people before Nicole is able to defend herself and kills the assassin. And the completely logical thing would be that you would call the police because somebody just tried to kill you and they killed 2 of your friends, and you have, you know, like a complete crime scene that is showing exactly that's what happened. And instead, because she's also at this point being set up herself in the media, she just simply turns around and says, no, I'm not going to do that. And there's no kind of sense that she's panicking and out of her mind with fear, and that she's, you know, like worried that there's another assassin just behind this guy, or like there's none of that. It's just, you know, dealt with in less than a paragraph, and it just doesn't make any sense. And there's just a couple of things like that really took me out of the plot, that really took me out of the world that this story was trying to build. So while it does have its interesting points, it is ultimately just quite a flawed novel, and it's honestly one that could have used a lot more editing work, if anything. You know, like a really strong editor would have come along. I feel, you know, this is me guessing how the work of a literary editor, you know, is, but it seems to me as though somebody should have said, well, actually, no, these points here and here don't quite make sense, as, you know, wouldn't make sense to the reader, and so these need addressing, and, you know, you could maybe make the characters a bit fuller, a bit rounder, and, you know, stuff like that. So it seems like it's come out in a 3/4 finished state. You know, most of the stuff is there, but it just needs a bit more polish. But given that it was released in 2013, it might be a bit late to you know, a bit late to come back to that now. But on the other hand, maybe not. You know, sometimes novels do come out with semi-major revisions, sometimes years later. So I won't really read anything out from this one. The actual prose style was, I think, generally speaking, one of the stronger points. But I'm struggling to think of any particular passage I could really read out. But I mean, it's an interesting but flawed book. You know, that's my takeaway from this. And if she is to write some more, you know, this is there's clearly some skill that's gone into this, and it's a good a good foundation for a bit more of a developed style that one would hope would come out after a first novel. But I don't know. I think I'm just saying things where I don't even fully know what I mean at this point, so it's probably a good time to wrap this one up. So anyway, hopefully you did find this interesting, and if you did, you can leave any comments below. You can hit the like button, you can sub to this channel if you haven't already, and as always, stay tuned for more.